my hands resting protectively over my 8-month pregnant belly as I navigating the hospital corridors with a thermal bag containing George's favorite sandwich. Turkey and Swiss on sourdough with that expensive mustard he loved. The September air had carried the scent of rain through our bedroom window that morning, and George had kissed my forehead before leaving for his shift, whispering, "Take care of our little miracle. Our little miracle." The words still echoed in my mind as I approached his office at Metropolitan General Hospital, where he worked as a cardiologist. We'd been trying for 3 years to have a baby, through countless disappointments and 2 heartbreaking miscarriages. When we finally saw those 2 pink lines, George had cried. Actually cried, holding me in our kitchen as sunlight streamed through the windows. "Dr. Violet Louise," I'd whispered to myself, practicing the sound of my married name with my future doctorate. I was 6 months away from defending my dissertation in psychology, and George had already started talking about the life we'd build together. The house, weekend barbecues, teaching our daughter to ride a bike. I pushed open the door to the cardiology wing, my swollen ankles protesting with each step. The afternoon shift was in full swing, nurses bustling between rooms, monitors beeping steadily. George's office was at the end of the hall, and I could see his nameplate gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Dr. George Louis, Cardiology. My heart swelled with pride. We'd met during my undergraduate years when I was volunteering at the hospital. He was already a resident then, confident and charming, with dark eyes that seemed to see right through to my soul. "You're going to change the world, Violet," he told me on our 3rd date, brushing a strand of hair from my face. "And I want to be right there beside you when you do." I knocked softly on his door, expecting to hear his warm voice call out, "Come in." Instead there was silence, then a strange shuffling sound. Maybe he was with a patient. I checked my watch. 2:15 p.m. His schedule showed he should be free now. I turned the handle and stepped inside. The thermal bag slipped from my hands and hit the floor with a dull thud. George was there, pressed against his desk, his white coat hanging open, his hands tangled in the auburn hair of a woman whose face I recognized immediately. Stacy Ryder, the new nursing supervisor who'd started some months ago. The woman who always seemed to find reasons to stop by our table when George and I had lunch in the hospital cafeteria. The woman who'd complimented my pregnancy glow while her eyes remained cold as winter. They were kissing with desperate hunger, her legs wrapped around his waist, medical charts scattered beneath them. His hands roamed her body with a familiarity that spoke of countless other encounters. This wasn't a moment of weakness. This was a practiced routine. Time seemed to suspend itself. I watched my husband's hands, the same hands that had caressed my pregnant belly that very morning, exploring another woman's body with passionate expertise. I watched Stacy's fingers work at his belt buckle with urgent need. I watched my entire world crumble in the space of 30 seconds. A sound escaped my throat, part gasp, part sob, raw and broken. They sprang apart like guilty teenagers. George's face went white, then flushed deep red. Stacy smoothed her uniform, but her lipstick was smeared, her hair disheveled, her eyes bright with malicious satisfaction. "Violet," George started, his voice cracking. "Don't." The word came out as a whisper. I tried to take a step backward, but my legs felt like liquid. "Don't you dare say my name." Stacy laughed, actually laughed, as she hopped off the desk and straightened her skirt. "Well, this is awkward." Her voice was light, amused, as if she'd been caught eating cookies before dinner instead of destroying my marriage. George shot her a warning look, but she ignored him, her gaze fixed on me with predatory intensity. "You know, Violet, I've been waiting for this moment. It's exhausting pretending to be nice to you at hospital functions." "Stacy, stop," George said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Stop what, darling?" She moved closer to him, her hand trailing across his chest with possessive familiarity. "Stop telling your wife the truth? That you haven't loved her in years? That you only stayed because you felt sorry for her after the miscarriages?" Each word was a knife sliding between my ribs. "That's not true," I managed to say, but my voice sounded foreign to my own ears. George's silence was deafening. "Oh, honey," Stacy continued, her tone dripping with false sympathy, "did you really think a man like George would be satisfied with someone like you? Look at yourself, swollen, waddling around like a cow. When's the last time you even saw your own feet?" "George," I said, my voice breaking. "Tell her to stop. Tell her she's lying." He looked at me then, and what I saw in his eyes was worse than hatred. It was pity. "Violet, we need to talk." But not here. Not like this. Not like this. I felt something wild and desperate clawing at my chest. Not like what, George? Not like finding my husband with his tongue down another woman's throat in his office? Not like discovering that my marriage is a lie while I'm 8 months pregnant with your child. Our child, he corrected quietly. Stacy's laugh was sharp as breaking glass. Is it though? George, didn't you tell me about those business trips she took during her fertile windows? All those psychology conferences. The implication hit me hard. How dare you? I whispered, my hands instinctively protecting my belly. How dare either of you question? Oh, please, Stacy interrupted, taking a step toward me. The grieving wife act is getting old. George and I have been together for 8 months. 8 months, Violet. Do the math. 8 months. The same age as my pregnancy. They'd started their affair right after I'd gotten pregnant. Right after George had cried tears of joy in our kitchen. Something inside me snapped. Get away from my husband, I said, my voice gaining strength. Your husband? Stacy's eyes glittered with malice. Honey, he hasn't been your husband in any way that matters for a long time. Trust me, I would know. She moved closer and I could smell her perfume, something expensive and cloying. The same scent I'd noticed on George's clothes for months but had dismissed as hospital odors. In fact, Stacy continued, her voice dropping to a whisper meant only for me. He was with me the night you went into false labor last month. Remember how he said he was stuck in surgery? He was stuck, all right. Stuck between my... Stop, I said, raising my hand. Just stop. But she didn't stop. She smiled, a cold, calculated expression that transformed her pretty features into something ugly and cruel. You want to know what he says about you, Violet? How he complains about your neediness, your constant crying over every little thing. How he wishes he'd never married you. Stacy, enough, George said, but he still hadn't moved toward me. He stood there like a spectator at his own life, watching his pregnant wife being verbally eviscerated by his mistress. No, George. She deserves to know the truth. Stacy's voice rose, becoming shrill. She deserves to know that you've been planning to leave her after the baby comes. That we've already looked at apartments together. That you've been lying to her face every single day while she waddles around playing happy housewife. The room began to spin. I reached for the doorframe to steady myself, but Stacy was suddenly there, blocking my path. Where are you going, Violet? Running away. That's what you do, isn't it? Run away from difficult conversations? No wonder George needed a real woman. Move, I said, my voice barely controlled. Make me. The words hung in the air like a challenge. I looked past her to George, silently begging him to intervene, to defend me, to show some remnant of the man who'd once promised to love and protect me. But he just stood there, his hands shoved deep in his pockets, his eyes fixed on the floor. Move, I repeated, my voice stronger now. Stacy's smile widened. Or what? You'll call your uncle? Run crying to Director Stetson about how mean the other kids are being to you. My blood turned to ice. Uncle Elliot had gotten me the volunteer position that led to meeting George. He'd walked me down the aisle at our wedding when my father couldn't be there. But I'd never used his position to get special treatment, never even mentioned our relationship to most people. That's right, Stacy continued, seeing the shock on my face. We know all about your little family connections. It's amazing what pillow talk can reveal, isn't it, George? George finally spoke up. Stacy, you're going too far. Am I? She whirled around to face him, her hair whipping dramatically. Am I going too far, or am I finally being honest? This woman has been living in a fantasy for 2 years, George. Someone needs to wake her up. She turned back to me, her face inches from mine. Your husband doesn't love you. Your marriage is over. And frankly, looking at you now, I can't blame him for wanting something better. That's when I made my mistake. I tried to push past her. Stacy's hand shot out and shoved me backward with surprising force. My pregnant body, already off balance, stumbled. I reached for anything to steady myself, but there was nothing but air. I hit the ground hard, landing on my side, my hands instinctively protecting my belly. Pain shot through my hip and shoulder, but it was nothing compared to the agony of what happened next. Stacy stood over me, her face twisted with rage and satisfaction. Stay down, she hissed. Stay down where you belong. And then, in a moment that would haunt my nightmares for months to come, She drew back her foot and kicked me directly in my pregnant belly. The pain was indescribable. Not just physical, though that was excruciating, but emotional, spiritual, a violation so complete that it seemed to tear something fundamental inside me. I curled around my unborn child, gasping as Stacy raised her foot again. Stop. The voice that cut through the air wasn't George's. It was deeper, more authoritative. What the hell is going on here? Uncle Elliot stood in the doorway, his face a mask of absolute fury. Behind him were two nurses who had clearly heard the commotion. The color drained from Stacy's face as she realized who had witnessed her assault. Director Stetson, she stammered, backing away from me. I can explain. Explain this. Uncle Elliot was across the room in 3 strides, kneeling beside me as I writhed on the floor. His hands were gentle but urgent as he checked my pulse, his eyes scanning for injuries. Someone call 911. Now. Uncle Elliot, I gasped, trying to sit up. The baby. Don't move, sweetheart. Just breathe. Help is coming. His voice was calm and professional, but I could see the storm brewing in his eyes as he looked up at George and Stacy. George finally seemed to realize the gravity of the situation. Violet, I'm sorry, I didn't know she would. Shut up, Uncle Elliot said, his voice so cold it could freeze blood. Don't say another word. Either of you. As sirens wailed in the distance, getting closer, I felt something wet between my legs. My water had broken. But it was too early. 8 months is too early. The baby's coming, I whispered, terror replacing rage as contractions began to tear through me. Uncle Elliot squeezed my hand. We're going to take care of you, Violet. You and the baby. Everything's going to be all right. But even as he said the words, I could see the worry in his eyes. And in that moment, as paramedics burst through the door and began working on me, as George stood frozen against the wall and Stacy cowered in the corner, I made a silent promise to my unborn daughter. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. They had no idea who they were messing with. Before we continue, please write in the comment which country you are watching this video. We love knowing where our global family is tuning in from. And if this is your first time on this channel, please subscribe. Your support helps us bring even more epic revenge tales of life. Enjoy listening. The delivery room at Metropolitan General had seen thousands of births, but none quite like this one. As my daughter fought her way into the world 8 weeks early, weighing barely 4 pounds, I felt something else being born alongside her. A cold, calculating fury that settled into my bones like winter frost. Mabel, I named her for my grandmother, a woman who'd survived the Great Depression through sheer determination, was whisked away to the NICU before I could even hold her properly. But in the brief moment our eyes met, I saw something fierce there, something unbreakable. She was a fighter just like the women in our family. She's going to be fine, Dr. Beckham assured me as they prepared to take her to intensive care. Small but strong. Her lungs are developed enough and all her vital signs are stable. Uncle Elliot squeezed my hand as they wheeled me to recovery. His silver hair was disheveled, his usually immaculate suit wrinkled, but his grip was steady and warm. I've been in contact with our legal department, he said quietly. And I've suspended both George and Ms. Ryder pending a full investigation. Suspended. The medication made my voice sound far away. Violet, what happened today, what I witnessed, that was assault. Against a pregnant woman. In my hospital. His jaw was set in a way I remembered from childhood, when he'd faced down bullies who'd picked on me at family gatherings. This isn't just a personal matter anymore. Through the haze of exhaustion and pain medication, I heard voices in the hallway. George's voice, pleading with someone. Then Stacy's higher-pitched, defensive. Uncle Elliot stood and walked to the door, his movements deliberate and controlled. If either of you comes within 50 feet of my niece or her daughter, I'll have hospital security remove you permanently, he said, his voice carrying clearly down the corridor. Consider this your only warning. Elliot, please, George's voice cracked. I need to see her. I need to explain. You need to get yourself a lawyer, Dr. Luis. Both of you do. The footsteps retreated and Uncle Elliot returned to my bedside. They're gone. And they won't be back. I closed my eyes but sleep wouldn't come. Every time I drifted off I saw Stacy's face, twisted with malice as her foot connected with my belly. I heard George's silence when I'd begged him to defend me. I felt the moment my fairy tale marriage revealed itself to be built on lies and betrayal. My phone buzzed on the bedside table. A text from my sister Gina. On my way. Flight lands in 3 hours. Don't make any decisions until I get there. Gina. My fierce, brilliant older sister who'd warned me about getting married too young, who'd never quite trusted George's charm. She was a corporate lawyer in Chicago, known for her ruthless negotiation skills and her ability to destroy opponents with surgical precision. If I needed anyone in my corner right now, it was her. The next few hours passed in a blur of medical consultations, legal paperwork and whispered conversations with Uncle Elliot about next steps and protecting our interests. When Gina finally burst through my door at 11 p.m., her red hair wild from running through the airport, I nearly broke down completely. "Oh, sweetie," she said, gathering me carefully into her arms. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." "Have you seen her?" I asked. "Mabel. First thing when I got here. She's beautiful, Vi. Tiny but perfect. She has your chin and your stubborn streak, I can already tell." We sat in silence for a moment, sisters who'd weathered countless storms together. Gina had been my maid of honor at my wedding to George, despite her reservations. She'd held my hand through both miscarriages, flying out from Chicago at a moment's notice. And now she was here again in my darkest hour. "Tell me everything," she said finally. "And don't leave anything out." So I did. Every humiliating detail, every cruel word, every moment of George's betrayal and Stacy's violence. Gina listened without interrupting, her green eyes growing harder with each revelation. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then, "They have no idea what they've done, do they?" "What do you mean?" Gina's smile was sharp as a blade. "Sweetie, they assaulted you. In front of witnesses. At Uncle Elliot's hospital. While you were pregnant. Do you understand what that means legally speaking?" I shook my head, too exhausted to think clearly. "It means we're going to destroy them. Professionally, financially, personally. By the time we're done, Stacy Ryder will wish she'd never heard your name, and George will realize that betraying a woman like you was the biggest mistake of his pathetic life. Gina, I just want..." "You want what?" "To forgive them. To work it out for the sake of the baby." She leaned forward, her voice intense. "Vi, listen to me. Some bridges can't be rebuilt. Some betrayals can't be forgiven. And some people deserve to face the consequences of their actions." She pulled out her phone and scrolled through her contacts. "I'm calling Melinda Florence. She's the best divorce attorney on the East Coast and she owes me a favor. We're going to make sure you and Mabel are protected and provided for." "I don't know if I'm ready for..." "You don't have to be ready. That's what family is for." Gina squeezed my hand. "You focus on healing and taking care of that beautiful baby girl. Let me handle the rest." Over the next week, as Mabel grew stronger in the NICU and I recovered from the emergency delivery, Gina orchestrated what she called Operation Justice. Mrs. Florence, a silver-haired woman with kind eyes and a reputation for being absolutely ruthless in court, came to see me in the hospital. "I've reviewed the initial police report," she said, settling into the visitor's chair with her briefcase. "Ms. Ryder has been charged with assault and battery. Given that you were pregnant at the time, the charges carry enhanced penalties. And George, your husband's situation is more complex. He wasn't the one who physically assaulted you, but he's certainly not innocent. We'll be pursuing adultery, abandonment, and emotional distress claims in the divorce proceedings." Mrs. Florence opened her briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. "I need you to understand something, Mrs. Louise. This case is going to attract attention. Hospital assault, premature birth, adultery. The media will be interested. Are you prepared for that level of scrutiny?" I thought about Mabel fighting for every breath in her incubator. I thought about George's hands on another woman's body. I thought about Stacy's foot connecting with my pregnant belly. "Let them look," I said. "I have nothing to hide." Mrs. Florence smiled and I understood why Gina had called her the best. "Then let's begin." 3 weeks after Mabel's birth, I was finally able to bring her home to my house in the suburbs. The same house where George and I had planned our future, where we'd painted the nursery pale yellow because we wanted to be surprised by the baby's gender. Now it felt like a mausoleum of broken dreams. Gina had taken a leave of absence from her job in Chicago to help me navigate the legal proceedings and early motherhood. She'd moved into the guest room temporarily, filling the house with her fierce energy and protective presence. Without her, I would have drowned in the paperwork, the sleepless nights with a premature baby, and the crushing weight of my shattered marriage. George has been calling, she told me one morning as I fed Mabel her bottle. 15 times yesterday. Uncle Elliot had to threaten him with a restraining order. What does he want? To see the baby. To explain himself. To beg for forgiveness, apparently. Gina's tone was flat, unimpressed. Mrs. Florence says we should document every attempt at contact. It'll help with the custody arrangements. Custody. The word made my stomach clench. The thought of sharing Mabel with George, of her spending weekends with him and potentially with Stacy, was unbearable. He won't get unsupervised visitation, Gina continued, reading my expression. Not after what happened. Mrs. Florence is confident about that. My phone buzzed on the coffee table. Another text from an unknown number, but I recognized George's desperate tone. Please, Violet. I know I messed up, but Mabel is my daughter too. Let me explain. Let me make this right. I deleted the message without responding, just like I'd done with the previous 27. The preliminary hearing for Stacy's assault charges is next week. Mrs. Florence had told me during our last meeting. Are you prepared to testify? I was. More than prepared. I wanted to look that woman in the eye and tell the world exactly what she'd done. But as the days passed, I began to realize that there were layers to this betrayal I hadn't even begun to uncover. It started with the insurance papers. Gina was helping me organize the mountain of medical bills from Mabel's NICU stay when she found the life insurance policy George had taken out on me 6 months ago. A $2 million policy I'd never known about. Vi, did you know about this? Gina's voice was carefully controlled, but I could see the concern in her eyes. No. Why would he? I stopped, the implications hitting me like a physical blow. When did you say he took this out? March 15th. Right around the time his affair with Stacy started, according to the hospital records Uncle Elliot pulled. We stared at each other across the kitchen table, Mabel sleeping peacefully in her carrier between us. The policy felt heavy in my hands, like evidence of something darker than simple adultery. People take out life insurance all the time, I said, but my voice sounded uncertain even to me. Especially when they're expecting a baby. $2 million, Vi. On a psychology student with no significant income. And he never told you about it. Gina was already reaching for her phone. I'm calling Mrs. Florence. And we need to talk to Uncle Elliot about George's access to medical records and medications. The thought that had been forming in the back of my mind was too terrible to voice. But Gina, ever practical, ever suspicious, was already 3 steps ahead. The false labor incident last month, she said quietly. When George said he was in surgery but was really with Stacy. What did you eat that day? Drink? Did George bring you anything? My hands began to shake as I remembered. He made me tea. Said it would help with the Braxton Hicks contractions. Some herbal blend he'd gotten from the hospital pharmacy. And you went into false labor an hour later. We looked at each other, both afraid to say what we were thinking. But the pieces were falling into place with horrifying clarity. He's a doctor, Gina said slowly. He has access to medications that could induce contractions. Medications that would be difficult to detect in routine blood work. But why? Why would he want me to go into early labor? Because premature babies don't always survive. And grieving widowers get a lot of sympathy. And $2 million. The room seemed to tilt around me. I thought about all the times over the past few months that George had brought me special drinks, vitamins he said were good for the baby, herbal teas to help with morning sickness. I thought about how attentive he'd been, how concerned about every little symptom. We need evidence, I whispered. We'll get it. Mrs. Florence has contacts at the FDA, people who can test for trace amounts of drugs. We'll check everything, the tea, the vitamins, anything he gave you. But Gina, if this is true, if George really tried to, I couldn't finish the sentence. Then he's not just an adulterous bastard. He's attempted murderer. The next few days passed in a haze of secret investigations and hushed phone calls. Mrs. Florence worked her contacts while Uncle Elliot quietly pulled George's prescription records and pharmacy access logs. Gina installed security cameras around the house and changed all the locks. Just as a precaution, she said, but I saw how she checked the windows twice before going to bed each night. The results came back on a Thursday morning. Mrs. Florence called while I was giving Mabel her morning bottle. and I could hear the grim satisfaction in her voice. "We found traces of misoprostol in the herbal tea," she said without preamble. "It's a medication used to induce labor among other things. The levels were subtle, not enough to guarantee a miscarriage, but certainly enough to trigger contractions in a woman already at risk for preterm labor." My legs gave out and I had to sit down heavily on the kitchen chair. "So he really tried to..." "He tried to kill you and the baby, yes. For the insurance money and his freedom to be with Ms. Ryder." "What happens now?" "Now we take this information to the district attorney. George Luis is going to be facing charges for attempted murder, insurance fraud and conspiracy. And Ms. Ryder was likely complicit. She knew about the insurance policy according to the emails we've uncovered." Mrs. Florence paused, and when she spoke again her voice was gentler. "Violet, I need you to understand something. This case is going to get national attention. The media will be fascinated by a story involving a doctor, his pregnant wife, attempted murder for insurance money, and a violent mistress. Are you prepared for that level of exposure?" I looked down at Mabel, who was watching me with those serious dark eyes that seemed too wise for a newborn. She'd survived her father's attempt to kill her before she was even born. She'd fought her way into the world despite being born 8 weeks early. She was a survivor just like her mother. "Let them come," I said. "The whole world can know what kind of man George Luis really is." But I had no idea that the story was about to take an even darker turn. The arraignment was scheduled for a crisp October morning, exactly 6 weeks after Mabel's dramatic entrance into the world. George appeared in court wearing an expensive suit and a face full of righteous indignation, flanked by 2 high-priced attorneys I recognized from billboards around the city. I sat in the front row with Mrs. Florence, Gina on my other side, and Uncle Elliot behind us for moral support. Mabel was at home with the nanny Gina had insisted we hire, a former military police officer named Rosa who took no chances with security. "Dr. George Luis," the judge intoned, "you're charged with attempted murder in the first degree, conspiracy to commit murder, insurance fraud, and adultery. How do you plead?" "Not guilty, Your Honor." George's voice was steady, confident even. When his eyes found mine across the courtroom, there was no remorse there, no acknowledgement of what he'd done. Only cold calculation. Stacy's arraignment followed immediately. She'd been released on bail after her initial arrest for the assault, but the new charges, conspiracy and accessory to attempted murder, had landed her back in custody. She looked terrible, her usually perfect hair lank and unwashed, her face pale and drawn. "Miss Stacy Ryder, how do you plead to the charges of conspiracy to commit murder, accessory to attempted murder, and assault and battery?" "Not guilty." Her voice was barely a whisper. As we filed out of the courthouse, reporters swarmed around us like angry bees. Microphones thrust toward my face, cameras flashing, voices shouting questions. "Mrs. Luis, how do you feel about your husband's arrest? Do you believe Dr. Luis tried to kill you for insurance money? What's your response to allegations that this is all a vindictive plot by your uncle?" Mrs. Florence guided me through the crowd with practiced efficiency, her hand firm on my elbow. "No comment," she repeated to every question. "Mrs. Luis will make a statement at the appropriate time." But as we reached the car I stopped. Something inside me, the same fierce instinct that had kept me going through the darkest nights with Mabel, demanded to be heard. "I have something to say," I told Mrs. Florence. She looked concerned. "Violet, we discussed this. It's better to..." "No." I turned to face the crowd of reporters, my spine straight, my voice clear. "George Luis tried to murder me and our unborn daughter for insurance money so he could start a new life with his mistress. When their plan failed, Stacy Ryder physically assaulted me in an attempt to complete what the drugs couldn't accomplish." The crowd fell silent, cameras clicking furiously. "My daughter survived because she's a fighter. I survived because I have family who love and protect me. And now George and Stacy are going to face the consequences of their actions in a court of law, where the truth will be revealed for everyone to see." I paused, looking directly into the nearest camera. "To any woman who's been betrayed, who's been made to feel worthless or disposable, you are stronger than you know. And you deserve justice." The ride home was quiet, Gina squeezing my hand in the backseat while Mrs. Florence fielded phone calls from reporters and legal colleagues. When we pulled into the driveway, Rosa met us at the door with Mabel in her arms. All quiet here, she reported in her clipped, professional tone. Though there have been several attempts to deliver flowers and gifts. I've documented everything and stored it in the garage for security screening. That evening, as I fed Mabel her bottle and watched the news coverage of the arraignment, my phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but something made me answer. Hello. Is this Violet Louise? The voice was female, nervous, with a slight southern accent. Yes. Who is this? My name is Sarah Chin. I used to work at Metropolitan General. I saw the news about your husband and I think I have information you need to hear. My pulse quickened. What kind of information? About Stacy Ryder. And about what really happened to Dr. Beckham. Dr. Beckham. The physician who'd delivered Mabel, who'd been so kind and competent during those terrifying hours in the emergency delivery room. I'd heard through Uncle Elliot that she'd left the hospital suddenly, taking a position in another state. Can you meet me somewhere? Sarah asked. Somewhere private? I'm afraid to talk about this over the phone. We arranged to meet the next morning at a coffee shop across town. I brought Gina with me for backup, leaving Mabel with Rosa and strict instructions to call if anything seemed amiss. Sarah Chin turned out to be a petite woman in her 30s, with worried eyes and nervous hands that shook as she lifted her coffee cup. She'd been a surgical technician at Metropolitan General for 5 years before abruptly quitting 3 weeks ago. I need to tell someone, she said without preamble. I can't sleep knowing what I know and not doing anything about it. What do you know about Stacy? I asked gently. She's done this before. Sarah's voice was barely above a whisper. Not the exact same thing, but targeting women, breaking up relationships, manipulating situations for her own benefit. She reached into her purse and pulled out a manila folder. There was another woman, Dr. Beckham. She was married, had 2 young kids. Stacy went after her husband. He was a pharmaceutical sales rep who visited the hospital regularly. My blood ran cold. What happened? Stacy seduced him just like she did with your husband. But when Dr. Beckham found out and confronted them, Stacy claimed that Dr. Beckham had been stealing medications from the pharmacy. She planted evidence, manipulated records, made it look like Dr. Beckham was selling drugs to feed a gambling addiction. Gina leaned forward, her lawyer instincts engaged. Do you have proof of this? Sarah nodded, sliding the folder across the table. I was working inventory that night when Stacy asked me to help her with some discrepancies in the medication logs. I didn't think anything of it at the time. Supervisors asking for help with paperwork wasn't unusual. But she had me sign off on forms that showed medications missing from Dr. Beckham's shifts. I opened the folder with trembling hands. Inside were photocopies of inventory sheets, medication logs, and what appeared to be surveillance footage stills showing Stacy in the pharmacy after hours. Dr. Beckham lost her medical license, Sarah continued. Her husband divorced her, got custody of the kids. She lost everything. And Stacy got promoted to nursing supervisor shortly after. Why didn't you say anything before? Gina asked, though her tone was understanding rather than accusatory. Because I was scared. Stacy had friends in administration, people who protected her. And I needed my job. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. But when I saw what happened to you, Mrs. Louise, when I realized she'd actually physically attacked a pregnant woman, I couldn't stay silent anymore. I thought about Dr. Beckham, the kind woman who'd helped bring Mabel safely into the world despite the chaos and trauma. She'd been another victim of Stacy's manipulation, another life destroyed by that woman's ambition and cruelty. There's more, Sarah said quietly. I think Stacy was planning to frame you too. What do you mean? She'd been asking questions about you for months. About your family background, your uncle's position at the hospital, your financial situation. She was particularly interested in your prescription for anxiety medication, the one you stopped taking when you got pregnant. The prenatal vitamins. The anxiety medication I'd stopped taking as soon as I found out I was expecting. George had been so supportive, so understanding about my decision to manage my pregnancy anxiety naturally with therapy instead of medication. She wanted to make it look like you had a history of drug problems, Sarah explained. Like maybe you'd been taking unprescribed medications, mixing things that could harm the baby. If the misoprostol had worked, if you'd lost the baby, she was planning to suggest that you'd been self-medicating and accidentally caused the miscarriage. The coffee shop suddenly felt too small, too warm. I could barely breathe as the full scope of Stacy's manipulation became clear. She hadn't just stolen my husband, she'd planned to destroy my reputation, my credibility, maybe even my freedom if anything had happened to Mabel. Will you testify? Gina asked Sarah. Will you tell all of this to the prosecutors? Sarah nodded, though her hands were still shaking. That's why I called. I can't let her hurt anyone else. We spent another hour going through the documentation Sarah had brought, her detailed account of Stacy's pattern of manipulation and destruction. By the time we left the coffee shop, I had a much clearer picture of who we were really dealing with. Stacy Ryder wasn't just a homewrecker or even a violent woman acting in the heat of the moment. She was a calculating predator who systematically targeted vulnerable people and destroyed their lives for personal gain. But she'd made one critical mistake. She'd underestimated me. That afternoon, Mrs. Florence called with news that felt like vindication. The prosecutor is adding additional charges based on the new evidence. Pattern of criminal behavior, evidence tampering, conspiracy to commit fraud. And we've located Dr. Beckham. She's agreed to testify about what Stacy did to her. What about George? His attorneys are trying to negotiate a plea deal. They're claiming he was manipulated by Ms. Ryder, that he was just as much a victim as you were. The audacity of that defense made my blood boil. He tried to kill me, Melinda. He tried to kill our daughter. I know. And we're not accepting any plea that doesn't include significant prison time. The evidence is too strong, the charge is too serious. But even as we planned our legal strategy, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were missing something. Stacy had been too confident during her arraignment, too composed for someone facing decades in prison. George's expensive lawyers suggested resources I didn't know he had. It wasn't until Rosa came to me with a concerned expression and a manila envelope that I began to understand the final piece of the puzzle. This came by courier an hour ago, she said, handing me the envelope. No return address, but it passed all the security screenings. Inside was a single photograph and a typed note. The photo showed George and Stacy in what looked like a hotel room, but they weren't alone. There was a third person in the image. A man I recognized from news reports as Vincent Caruso, a known associate of organized crime families in the area. The note was brief. Your husband owes people money. A lot of money. The insurance policy wasn't just about starting a new life. It was about staying alive. Thought you should know. A friend. I stared at the photograph, pieces of the puzzle clicking into place with terrifying clarity. George's expensive lawyers, Stacy's confidence, the elaborate nature of their plan. It all made sense if they'd been working with people who had experience in making problems disappear permanently. Gina, I called, my voice barely steady. We need to call Mrs. Florence. Now. What is it? I handed her the photograph and note. Her face went white as she processed the implications. Oh Vi. This isn't just about adultery and insurance fraud anymore. No, I said, looking down at Mabel sleeping peacefully in her carrier. It's about organized crime, money laundering, and people who kill for a living. The game had just changed completely. But I was no longer the naive, trusting woman who'd walked into her husband's office with a turkey sandwich 6 weeks ago. I was a mother now, with everything to fight for and nothing left to lose. And I was about to show George, Stacy, and their criminal associates exactly what happened when they threatened my family. The revelation about George's connection to Vincent Caruso sent shockwaves through our legal team. Mrs. Florence immediately contacted the FBI, who confirmed what we'd suspected. George had been laundering money through fake medical equipment purchases for the past 18 months, skimming from the hospital's accounts to pay gambling debts to Caruso's organization. The insurance money wasn't just about starting fresh with Stacy. Agent Rebecca Santos explained during a meeting at Mrs. Florence's office. Your husband owed Caruso's people nearly $3 million. The life insurance payout would have cleared his debts and bought his freedom. And when the misoprostol didn't work? I asked. They moved to Plan B. Stacy's assault was meant to finish what the drugs started. If you'd lost the baby and died from complications, it would have looked like a tragic accident following a domestic dispute. The coldness of it, the calculated nature of their plan to murder me and my unborn child, should have destroyed me. Instead, it crystallized my resolve into something harder than diamond. What do you need from me? I asked. Agent Santos smiled grimly. We need you to help us catch them all. The plan was audacious and dangerous. I would wear a wire and meet with George. ostensibly to discuss custody arrangements for Mabel. The meeting would take place at our old house, the one I'd moved out of after discovering the extent of his betrayal, under the pretext of collecting more of my belongings. "He'll try to manipulate you," Agent Santos warned. "He'll apologize, claim he was coerced, promise to change. Don't believe any of it. And whatever you do, don't let him know that we're aware of the Caruso connection. What if he gets suspicious? What if he realizes I'm working with the FBI? Then you get out immediately. We'll have agents positioned around the house, but your safety is the priority." Gina was adamantly against the plan. "It's too risky," she argued as we sat in my new apartment. A secure building with doorman and security cameras that Rosa had helped me find. What if something goes wrong? What if George realizes you're wearing a wire? Then we lose the chance to get evidence against Caruso's people, I replied. "Gina, they tried to kill me and Mabel. If we don't stop them now, they'll try again. Or they'll find other victims." I looked down at my daughter, now 3 months old and thriving despite her premature start. She'd gained weight, her cheeks had filled out, and she'd started smiling, real smiles that lit up her entire face. I would do anything to protect her future. The meeting was set for the following Tuesday. George had agreed eagerly when I'd called, his voice full of hope and gratitude that I was finally ready to talk. His optimism would have been pathetic if it wasn't so dangerous. I spent the weekend preparing, working with Agent Santos and her team to anticipate every possible scenario. The wire was nearly invisible, a small device that transmitted to receivers positioned around the house. If anything went wrong, help would be there in seconds. "Remember," Mrs. Florence said on Monday night, "you're not just gathering evidence for the criminal case. Anything George says can be used in the custody proceedings too. Let him talk. Let him reveal who he really is." Tuesday morning dawned gray and cold, matching my mood as I drove to the house where I'd once planned to raise my children and grow old with my husband. The familiar sight of the white picket fence and red brick facade sent a pang through my chest, not for what was but for what I thought was real. George was waiting in the kitchen and I was struck by how different he looked. He'd lost weight, his face was haggard, and there were dark circles under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights. But when he saw me, his expression brightened with desperate hope. "Violet, thank you for coming. Thank you for giving me this chance." "This isn't about second chances, George," I said, keeping my voice carefully neutral. "This is about Mabel. About what's best for her. Of course, that's what matters most." He gestured toward the kitchen table where he'd set out coffee and the pastries I used to love from the bakery downtown. "Please sit. We need to talk." I remained standing, my hand resting on the back of the chair. "Talk about what?" "About how you tried to kill me for insurance money. About how your mistress attacked me while I was pregnant. About how you stood there and watched." His face crumpled, and for a moment I almost felt sorry for him. "Almost. I never meant for any of that to happen," he said, his voice breaking. "You have to believe me, Vi. I got in over my head with some bad people and I made terrible choices, but I never wanted you to get hurt." "Bad people?" I kept my expression carefully neutral, not letting on that I knew about Caruso. George ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I'd once found endearing. "I had some gambling problems. Debts. I borrowed money from people I shouldn't have, and when I couldn't pay them back. They threatened you? They threatened all of us. You, me, the baby. I was trying to protect our family, Violet. The insurance policy, the other things. It was all about getting enough money to pay them off and disappear somewhere safe." The lies came so smoothly, with such apparent sincerity, that I could see how he'd manipulated me for years. But now I recognized the pattern. The way he positioned himself as the victim, the way he made his betrayal sound like sacrifice. "So you decided to murder me instead?" "No. God, no. That was never the plan." He moved closer, his eyes pleading. "The medication was just supposed to induce early labor. Premature babies have complications sometimes. Insurance companies don't ask as many questions when there are natural medical issues involved." My blood turned to ice. He was admitting it, casually discussing his plan to kill our daughter as if it were a reasonable business decision. And if I died too? From the complications. George's silence was answer enough. "What about Stacy?" I asked. "Was seducing her part of your master plan too?" For the first time his mask slipped completely. His face hardened and I saw something cold and calculating in his eyes that I'd never noticed before, or had willfully ignored. Stacy was a mistake, he said flatly. A weakness I shouldn't have indulged. But she became useful. She had access to medical records, prescription logs. She knew how to manipulate the system. Useful enough to help you frame Dr. Beckham? His head snapped up, surprise flashing across his face. How do you know about? I know a lot of things, George. Like how you've been laundering money through fake equipment purchases. Like how Vincent Crusoe owns $3 million of your soul. The color drained from his face completely. Violet, you don't understand. These people, if they find out you know. They'll what? Try to kill me? Been there, done that, survived it. George moved toward the phone on the counter, but I was faster. Don't even think about it, I said, positioning myself between him and any potential escape route. You're wearing a wire, he said, the words coming out flat and defeated. This whole thing is a setup. Just like your marriage to me was a setup? Just like your concern for our family was a setup. His expression shifted again, and now I saw the man he really was, desperate, cornered, and dangerous. You have no idea what you've done, he said quietly. Caruso doesn't forgive and he doesn't forget. If you think you've won something here, you're more naive than I thought. Maybe. But at least I'm not a murderer. That's when he lunged at me. George was bigger and stronger, but I'd spent the last 3 months in self-defense classes that Rosa had insisted on. More importantly, I was fighting for my daughter's future while he was fighting to save his own skin. I dodged his grab and brought my knee up hard into his solar plexus. As he doubled over, gasping, the front door burst open and FBI agents flooded the room. FBI. Hands where we can see them. George was on the ground, cuffed and read his rights within 30 seconds. Agent Santos approached me with concern in her eyes. Are you hurt? Did he say anything useful before he figured out the wire? Everything we need, I replied, pulling the recording device from my jacket. Including admissions about the insurance fraud, the medication, and his connections to Vincent Crusoe. As they led George away, he turned back to look at me one last time. This isn't over, Violet, he said quietly. It's never going to be over. But he was wrong. It was about to be very, very over. The trials of George Luis and Stacy Ryder became the most talked about criminal cases in the state that year. Media outlets dubbed it the hospital betrayal case, and court TV covered every day of testimony. I'd become something I never wanted to be, a public figure, a symbol of betrayal survived and justice sought. But I'd also become something I'd always had the potential to be, a woman who refused to be a victim. George's trial came first. The evidence was overwhelming. The recorded conversation where he'd admitted to the insurance fraud and attempted murder. The medical records showing his access to the drugs found in my system, financial documents linking him to Vincent Crusoe's money laundering operation. His defense team tried everything. They claimed he'd been coerced by organized crime figures. They suggested I'd manipulated the evidence with help from my uncle's position at the hospital. They even tried to argue that George had been protecting me by planning my death, since Caruso would have killed our entire family if the debts weren't paid. None of it worked. Dr. Beckham testified about how Stacy had systematically destroyed her career and family. Sarah Chin provided detailed evidence of Stacy's pattern of manipulation and fraud. Uncle Elliot took the stand to describe finding me on the floor of George's office, Stacy standing over me with malicious satisfaction. But the most powerful testimony came from an unexpected source: Vincent Crusoe himself. The FBI had arrested Caruso and several of his associates based on the evidence gathered from George's wire recordings. Facing decades in federal prison, Caruso decided to cooperate with prosecutors in exchange for a reduced sentence. Dr. Luis approached us about 18 months ago, Caruso testified in his gravelly voice, looking nothing like the dangerous criminal I'd imagined. He seemed almost ordinary, a balding middle-aged man in an expensive suit. He owed us money from sports betting, kept promising he could pay but never delivered. Finally, he came to us with this scheme about insurance fraud. Did you encourage Dr. Luis to harm his wife? The prosecutor asked. We told him to handle his business however he wanted as long as we got our money. If his wife had to die for that to happen, that was his choice to make. The casual way he discussed my potential murder sent chills through the courtroom. But it also sealed George's fate. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Guilty on all counts: attempted murder, conspiracy, insurance fraud, money laundering, and racketeering. The judge sentenced him to 35 years to life, with no possibility of parole for 25 years. As the bailiff led him away in shackles, George looked at me one final time. There was no apology in his eyes, no remorse. Only bitter resentment that his plan had failed. Stacy's trial was shorter but no less satisfying. In addition to her assault on me, she faced charges related to the Dr. Beckham frame-up and her role in George's insurance fraud conspiracy. She took the stand in her own defense, a decision her lawyers clearly regretted. Stacy tried to portray herself as another victim of George's manipulation, a woman seduced by a charming doctor who'd promised her the world. "I never meant to hurt anyone," she said, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. "George told me that Violet was planning to leave him, that she'd been having affairs. He said she was going to take everything in the divorce and disappear with the baby." "So you decided to push her down and kick her in the stomach?" the prosecutor asked dryly. "I was angry. I thought she was going to destroy the man I loved. I wasn't thinking clearly." "Were you thinking clearly when you planted evidence to destroy Dr. Beckham's career?" "That was George's idea. He said she was stealing medications, that someone needed to report her before patients got hurt." Lie after lie, excuse after excuse. But the evidence was clear, and the jury saw through her performance easily. They convicted her on all counts, and the judge sentenced her to 15 years in prison. 10 for the assault on me and Mabel, 5 for her role in the conspiracy against Dr. Beckham. "Ms. Ryder," the judge said before imposing sentence, "you have shown a pattern of calculated cruelty and manipulation that demonstrates a complete lack of remorse or empathy. You attacked a pregnant woman with the intent to harm both her and her unborn child. You destroyed an innocent doctor's career and family for personal gain. This court can find no mitigating factors that would justify leniency." As they led Stacy away, she turned to look at me with pure hatred. "This isn't justice," she spat. "This is revenge." "Sometimes," I said quietly, knowing she could hear me, "they're the same thing." 2 years later, I stood at the podium of the university's largest lecture hall, looking out at a sea of eager faces. My doctoral dissertation on trauma recovery and post-traumatic growth in victims of intimate partner violence had been accepted with highest honors, and I'd been offered a position as assistant professor of psychology with a specialization in victim advocacy. Survival, I told my students, isn't just about getting through the crisis. It's about using that experience to build something stronger, something better than what existed before. In the front row, Gina beamed with pride while Uncle Elliot held 2-year-old Mabel on his lap. My daughter had grown into a fierce, determined toddler with her father's dark eyes but none of his capacity for deception. She'd inherited my stubborn streak and her aunt's sharp intelligence. After class, we walked to the campus coffee shop where Dr. Beckham was waiting for us. She'd successfully appealed the decision that had cost her medical license, and after a lengthy legal battle, she'd been reinstated and offered a position at Uncle Elliot's hospital. Her children, now teenagers, had come to live with her again after their father's arrest for embezzlement, a crime he'd committed trying to pay for his expensive lawyers during the custody battle. "How does it feel?" Dr. Beckham asked as we settled at our usual table. "Like justice," I replied honestly. "Like the world makes sense again." George was serving his sentence in a federal penitentiary, where his medical training made him valuable enough to keep safe from other inmates. He'd be eligible for parole when Mabel turned 27, assuming he lived that long. Vincent Caruso had received 12 years in exchange for his cooperation, and several of his associates had received longer sentences. Stacy had tried to appeal her conviction twice, claiming ineffective assistance of counsel and judicial bias. Both appeals had been denied. She'd be in prison until Mabel graduated from high school. Mrs. Florence had helped me secure a settlement from the hospital's insurance company for their failure to properly screen and supervise Stacy. The money had paid for my legal fees, my education, and a trust fund for Mabel's future. More importantly, it had funded a victim advocacy program at the hospital that provided support and legal resources for other women facing domestic violence. "Any word from George?" Gina asked, bouncing Mabel on her knee. "He's still writing letters," I said. "The prison forwards them to Mrs. Florence, who files them without me reading them." I don't need his apologies or explanations anymore. Good, Uncle Elliot said firmly. Some bridges are better left burned. As we sat there sharing coffee and watching Mabel play with her toy medical kit, she declared she wanted to be a baby doctor, like Uncle Elliot. I reflected on how much had changed. I'd lost a marriage, but I'd gained my strength. I'd lost my naive trust in people, but I'd gained the ability to see clearly through deception. I'd lost the woman I used to be, but I'd become someone much more powerful. The little silver locket around Mabel's neck caught the afternoon light. Inside was a photo of the two of us on the day she came home from the NICU, both of U.S. survivors of an attempt to destroy us before we'd even had a chance to fight back. That photograph had been the final piece of evidence that sealed George and Stacy's fate. Proof that despite their best efforts to eliminate us, we had not only survived but thrived. My phone buzzed with a text message from Rosa, now permanently employed as head of security for my small but growing practice. New client wants to schedule consultation. Says she heard your interview on NPR and needs help dealing with domestic violence situation. Interested? I looked at my daughter, my sister, my uncle, and my friend. I looked at the life I'd built from the ashes of betrayal. I thought about the woman who'd called Rosa, desperate for help and hope. Tell her I'll see her tomorrow, I texted back. Because this was what I'd learned. The best revenge isn't just surviving what someone tried to do to you. The best revenge is using that survival to build something beautiful, something that helps other people survive too. The best revenge is a life well lived with the people who deserve your love and trust. And sometimes, the best revenge is simply being strong enough to help the next victim become a survivor. As we walked across campus in the golden afternoon light, Mabel babbling happily about her toy stethoscope, I realized that George and Stacy had given me something they'd never intended to give. The absolute certainty that I was capable of anything. They'd tried to destroy me and instead they'd made me unbreakable. That was a gift I'd carry forever, and use to help others find their own strength. The nightmare was over. The rest of my life was just beginning. And it was going to be extraordinary.